while we're here, I might as well talk about the Crimea referendum of 2014, because it's kind of interesting how this has just been memory holed entirely. Like, I'm not going to say anything about what the status of Crimea should be. However, like the desires of the majority of the vast majority of the population in Crimea was very clearly to join Russia, and we have a ton of evidence for that. We, in fact, have so much evidence of this that it's ludicrous, and that this is just completely ignored, and everyone's like, oh yeah, Ukraine gonna retake Crimea, as if that clearly isn't something that's going to be quite difficult, given that most of the civilian population would be heavily against it. Even just disregarding the military factor is ludicrous. It's especially ludicrous to me because the argument that a lot of these same people who say that use in regards to Taiwan is that most people in Taiwan don't want to be part of China, or at least don't want to officially join China, like, you know, blah, 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 blah. Ergo, that is reason enough alone for why Taiwan should be independent, or rather to maintain the status quo, to choose whatever political status the majority wants. But in Crimea, this sort of majority rule argument evaporates. This is so mainstream, by the way. This is so mainstream, I'm literally just going to look at a Wikipedia article. Like, this information, it's right there on fucking Wikipedia. I'm not going to any crazy fucking gray zone websites or anything. Everything that I'm sourcing here is from Western sources that, up until the moment of the Ukraine invasion, were very matter-of-fact in acknowledging the simple fact that most people in Crimea really do want to be a part of Russia. So I'm just going to present that information here. I don't want to, like, assess it. I don't want to draw any conclusions from it yet, because I'm making a whole fucking video where I do that. So I don't want to give you guys spoilers or anything. On my main channel, rather, I'm making a video about it. So polling, right? In 2008, a polling by a Ukrainian Center for Economic and Political Studies found that 63.8% of Crimeans would like Crimea to secede from Ukraine and join Russia. The United Nations Development Program conducted a series of polls from 2009 to 2011, and each and every one of them showed a plurality, at least, favoring leaving Ukraine and joining Russia. Obviously, in 2014, Russia invaded Crimea and then held a referendum on whether Crimea should join Russia, which it got something like 83% of the vote, at least according to Wikipedia. 80%, like something like 82, 83% in all up. And this has been called like a fraudulent referendum, blah, 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 blah. There is sort of some truth to the fraudulent referendum thing. Like, I seriously doubt the referendum was carried out with much care or anything. And Russia has carried out some very obviously fucking fraudulent referendums since then, in Donetsk, Luhansk, and a bunch of other regions of Ukraine, such as Kherson, which they did recently, where 97% of people, according to them, voted to join Russia, even in places that, were not even remotely on the radar for this sort of thing previously. It's obviously just bullshit. But the Crimea referendum took place in 2014. And what I'm interested in here isn't so much, well, was the referendum carried out fairly or well? But what I'm concerned with here is, did it actually reflect public opinion? Like, is this roughly there or thereabouts what most people in Crimea actually want? And we have nothing but evidence to support the notion that, yes, they did. Because after that, there were 3 separate polls carried out by some very reputable Western polling agencies who are very clearly not biased towards Russia. So the US government-run Broadcasting Board of Governors, which is the parent agency of Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, etc., by the way, conducted a poll immediately following the referendum, which was, no, they didn't conduct it. It was commissioned by them and run by Gallup, who is a obviously Western biased polling organization, that found that 83% of Crimeans felt that the results of the referendum likely reflected the views of most people there. Okay? A poll by Pew Research, which is, along with Gallup, one of the 2 big Western American polling companies, found that the majority of Crimean residents say that the referendum was free and fair, 91%, and that the government in Kiev ought to recognize the results of the vote. And then, according to a poll of Crimeans by the Ukrainian branch of Germany's biggest market research organization, GfK. By the way, this is a poll.
If you don't trust the CIA, then who do you trust?
This poll was actually it was commissioned by an organization literally called Free Crimea that advocates for Crimea to be quote-unquote freed by rejoining Ukraine. So this poll, unfortunately, didn't return the results that this organization wanted. It found that 82% of those polls said they fully supported Crimea's inclusion in Russia, and another 11% expressed partial support. Only 4% spoke out against it. So, yeah, we have evidence from beforehand that clearly fucking indicates that most people in Crimea already favored joining Russia. And then, obviously, since 2014, with the whole Euromaidan debacle where the pro-Russian president was ousted and replaced with a pro-European anti-Russian president, that it's pretty clear that that sentiment only increased and people wanted to join Russia even more. You know, obviously the polls went up by like 10-20% since then. So look, it's so consistent for so long, and the shift to slightly higher percentages for yes is obviously so in line with events, you know, and easily explainable by events of what happened around that time, that it's undeniable. Like, if we're looking at this from nothing more than majority rules, what the majority ones goes, then Crimea should be a part of Russia. Now, if that's not my actual opinion, my actual opinion is more complicated, but that is the truth. The status of Crimea is far more complicated than it's often made out to be. This isn't so much the case for other parts like Donetsk, Luhansk, and, you know, other places further to the east of their even more of a joke that Russia just claims, oh, these are ours now. But in Crimea, it's abundantly clear, and there's so much evidence of the fact that most people there want to be part of Russia that it's undeniable. And this is something that people can't just fucking ignore, as Western propaganda has been ever since the Russian invasion began. Because ignoring that is probably not going to go well. If Ukraine ends up winning to the extent that, like, they actually invade Crimea and face an incredibly hostile civilian population, that would be a disaster. Or if Ukraine isn't willing to give up Crimea on the negotiating table, because, you know, whether or not it should be there, you know, whether it should be theirs or not, depending on whatever the fuck your opinion, doesn't really matter. It's a harder sell when most of the population wouldn't want to rejoin Ukraine. So kind of an interesting thing there that I just wanted to cover without, you know, sort of giving up the game on my longer video on self-determination that is also going to be using Crimea as an illustrative case to talk about.
Feels like he supports the Holocaust.